When I was a kid, I was a little bit of a picky eater. And one of the things that I really did not like when I was tomatoes. Hated tomatoes. If there was a tomato on my hamburger, I'd toss it away. Or if somebody tried to put a tomato on my sandwich, leave that tomato away from me. I don't want to have anything to do with that tomato. Right? Now, the weird thing about that is that I liked ketchup and I liked spaghetti sauce, and both of those things are made of tomato. Right? That's their primary ingredient. But I just didn't like tomatoes. I never liked them. If there was a tomato in my salad, no tomatoes, right? And one day, when I started dating my now wife, Brandy, she wanted to make a BLT sandwich for me with a tomato from her garden. And I said, I don't like tomatoes. I don't want to have a BLT sandwich. I'll just take the B and the L and we'll leave off the T. Right? I don't like tomatoes. And she said, well, have you ever tried a tomato? And I said, well, of course I've tried tomatoes. What do you mean? I've tried it. I don't like them. Have you ever tried a tomato that came out of a garden? Well, gee, probably not, because why would I try something that I don't like? I know I don't like it. So she sliced the tomato. She got a tomato out, sliced it, put some salt and pepper on it, cut off a bite and said, here, try this. Just trust me, try it. And I tried it, and it was like nothing I'd ever tasted before. I was like, what have I been missing the whole time when I didn't like tomatoes? Now, it wasn't untrue that I didn't like tomatoes when I was a kid. I didn't like them, but what I discovered is that I didn't like the tomatoes that I bought from a grocery store or that somebody purchased from a grocery store. Because if you have experience with tomatoes, then you know that tomatoes are not ripe for very long on the vine. So if commercially grown tomatoes were allowed to ripen on the vine, which is where they taste the best and they get the most flavor, right? If they had the time to do that, by the time they got to the store, they'd be a pile of mush. Right? So what they do is they harvest them early when they're still green and then put them in a room with nitrogen that makes them turn red, and so they get this nice, bright, shiny red color that we are familiar with if we have tomatoes on the vine. Right? But they still don't have that flavor and that texture and that consistency that a garden-ripened tomato will provide. And because this was so good, this tomato, I decided I want to learn how to grow tomatoes next year. I will study on how to grow tomatoes, and I will grow my own tomatoes next year. So I did a lot of studying about how, first of all, when to plant. Because in Utah, where I was living, the Farmer's Almanac tells us that Mother's Day is usually a safe bet, because tomatoes are very fragile plants. They don't like it when it's too cold, and they don't like it when it's too hot. Now, something interesting about here in Phoenix is that we actually have two growing seasons that kind of go on the outskirts of the hottest and the coldest times, right? In Utah, there's just one growing season, and it starts about Mother's Day, okay? That's usually the safest time to start planting your plants. And then it lasts through about the first hard freeze, which sometimes happens around October. So you have your plants that go all the way from May until about October. And if you have grown your own tomatoes, then you know that you don't go from small plant to BLT sandwich overnight. Right? It takes a long time to go from a small plant that you've planted until you get to have your yummy BLT sandwich, or you have enough tomatoes that you can make a salad, or you can make spaghetti sauce. All of those things are wonderful things you can do with tomatoes, but it doesn't happen overnight. Right? There's a lot of work involved. First of all, before you get to the time where you plant, you want to make sure that your soil is in good shape. Right? You want to make sure that there's lots of compost soil. You want to make sure that it's got nutrients, that it's got oxygen, that it's got worms, right? Because worms help the soil to be healthy soil. Right? So you want to make sure the soil is healthy. Then once you plant them, you want to plant them in a cage, right? Because you want to make sure that they grow upward, and that the tomatoes don't just end up laying on the ground, because if they're on the ground, they're more susceptible to pests like bugs and rodents and things like that will that will devour them. They'll go rotten once they blossom. And so you want to make them grow up. And when they're growing, you have to take time every day to water. You want to make sure that you're watering the tomato plants. You want to make sure that you are fertilizing them. You want to make sure that you are pulling the weeds, because sometimes weeds grow up and you don't want your weeds to choke out the tomato plants. So it takes a lot of time and work to get that delicious tomato that is so much better than any tomato you've ever bought at a store. There's a lot of effort that goes into it. And that's kind of what Jesus is talking about in today's parable of the sower, right? We want to make sure that we are doing the difficult work when we are sowing our seeds, right? And the result of sowing our seeds is not something that happens overnight. It takes time and effort to grow and to yield that good fruit. And I want to share with you an example of how we here at St. John's are producing that good fruit. We have today, in just a few moments, a baptism. Cassie, I'm gonna pick on Cassie here because it's her special day. Cassie came to us a little over a year ago, and she was seeking a church where she could participate and be a product, some good fruit. Right? Cassie had some experiences in Christianity in her youth. She was never baptized. We don't do rebaptism. That's not something we do. But she was attending Christian churches and reached a point, like many of us do, where sometimes the messages that were being taught at the pulpit were not matching what Jesus wants us to do. And so she came and she found us here at St. John's. And a little over a year ago, I had people coming up to me and saying, "Hey, have you met Cassie? Have you met Cassie yet? What's the story with Cassie? What's going on with Cassie? She's doing everything. She's like, she wants to be in the choir, and she's helping with the kitchen, and she's helping with all of these activities, very involved almost immediately." And that was at a time in our parish when we had a lot of people coming in. A lot of people coming in and checking us out. So I'm sure I had seen Cassie, but I hadn't met her formally yet until finally I got the chance to sit down and chat with Cassie. She's a very dedicated person. And just recently she has asked that she be baptized into this community, because this is the community where she found that fertile soil that is producing kind of life-giving faith nutrition, if you will, that is feeding her spiritually. Right? There are a lot of people who are seeds right now and who are seeking that fertile soil. There are a lot of people in our world who are seeking that kind of sanctuary. And sanctuary, where we are right now, the word sanctuary means a safe place. So there are people who are seeking a safe place. And it is our role, as those of us who are already here, to nurture that soil and to tend to that soil and to help those people in our lives who come and visit us to flourish and to grow in their faith and in their love. Because what's happening today, the way we're doing the baptism today, that's actually the way it was supposed to be. In the early days of the church, there was no tradition of infant baptism. An adult person would come forward and say, I've tried out this community and I want to belong to this community and I want to be baptized into this community. And that person was given instruction and education and lots of formation until the day of the baptism, right? Now, why do we have infant baptism? If you're anything like me, then you were baptized when you were a baby. I wasn't even a month old when I was baptized. Right? That became a normative practice, but it was a pastoral consideration. Baptism was supposed to be me saying, I want to be a Christian, not somebody telling me that I'm going to be a Christian on their behalf. But what happened was, even within the last several decades, the last century, infant mortality was pretty high. And it was not uncommon for a child to die at a young age. And so, like Paul says in our reading today, we get eternal life through our baptism, but what happens if my child wasn't baptized? What happens if my child isn't baptized? Now, the theological answer is that God will take care of that child. That child is not in any danger. But what if I'm feeling anxious because my child hasn't been baptized, and I just can't wrap my head around the idea, if baptism gives us eternal life and my child hasn't been baptized, then my child's not going to get eternal life. So, let's make a consideration, and let's baptize your baby, and the godparents can speak on behalf of the baby and make those promises by proxy. Right? So that's where that comes from. But today, in the way we are doing our baptism today, that's the way it was supposed to be. Things that we run up against in the church when we are trying to nurture that soil and to yield that good fruit is that sometimes change happens. Sometimes there's change that is just inevitable because the environment in the room is different. Right? And that change makes things different than the way they once were. Right? It isn't anybody's fault. It isn't necessarily anything that's being done on purpose. It's just a change. And sometimes that change can produce what we call in the church anxiety. And if you want to know what anxiety looks like, you might be familiar with an old fairy tale called Chicken Little. Chicken Little. And Chicken Little, that's what we call her in this country. There are other names in other countries, and they always have some kind of a rhyme. So Henny Penny, you may have heard of that. But Chicken Little is a little chicken, how about that, appropriately named, right? Who has an acorn fall on her head. And when the acorn falls on her head, it bounces off, and she doesn't see where it went. And so all she sees is the sky. Well, something hit her head. So the sky must be falling. The sky is falling. The sky is falling. So Chicken Little goes to all the other animals on the farm and says, the sky is falling. The sky is falling. Because Chicken Little is so worked up, they buy into the hype and they feel anxious also. Okay? Now the sky is not falling. Chicken Little just was a little uncomfortable because an acorn hit her head. Right? Not even any danger, but just a little uncomfortable. But that discomfort put Chicken Little in a position where she thought it was a good idea to go around telling everybody that the sky is falling. And when there's change, sometimes it can be uncomfortable. Okay? And so we have to do the difficult work as Christians. If we are producing this good soil, we have to do the difficult work of discerning when things feel different. Am I uncomfortable, or is the sky really falling? Because usually the answer is no, the sky is not falling. The sky is not falling, and there's not a catastrophe, even if it feels like we are losing something that may have existed previously. And if that's the case, then it's important to grieve those losses, to grieve that change, because things are different. But it isn't something that is the result of anything that anyone has done. It's just that the world is moving forward, and we want to continue to be a place where we can yield that good soil and tend the garden and produce that good fruit, those healthy tomatoes. I was listening to an interview with one of my heroes. You know that one of my heroes is Father Greg Boyle, the founder of Homeboy Industries, which is the largest gang member rehabilitation program in the world. And he's a Jesuit priest. And someone asked Father Greg, well, you have a very strict drug policy at Homeboy. And so what is it like for you when you have to fire somebody because they violated the drug policy? And he had an interesting answer. He said, well, first of all, we make sure that the drug policy is very well known. Right? So everybody knows it, everybody agrees to it. So anybody who needs to leave because they violated the drug policy, they've made the decision to leave. Okay, so that's one way of looking at it first. But second of all, how he handles that is he tells that person, you're just not ready right now. It's obvious that you're not ready. So come back when you're ready. Do the work that you need to do, and then come back when you're ready. Right? So he maintains this theology that all are welcome, right? But to be able to participate in making that fertile soil, right, we have to say that we are ready. Right? So I want us as a parish to think about that, to think about all of the wonderful things that are happening here. We have a baptism today. Right? We have new people who are coming in and visiting us all the time. There are people who are checking us out. Some are finding this to be a place where they want to make their spiritual home. Some people are finding this and they're saying, well, it's nice, but it's not for me, and that's okay, because we're helping those people on their journey, right? Wherever their journey leads them, this was a part of their journey. So we want to continue to nourish that soil and to tend the garden and to make sure that everything is growing properly. And we want to look and enjoy the fruits that we have. The baptism that we are going to be celebrating today. Another baptism that we are going to be celebrating in November. Right? There are lots of wonderful things happening. We have a vacation Bible school that is being brought back this week after, I think it's been at least 3 years and maybe longer since we've had enough kids to have a vacation Bible school. And that is something that is the direct result of some of the fruit that this parish has yielded, because another similar story is that of Julie. We have Julie, who is a very qualified and wonderful person to lead us in that section of our life as a parish. Right? We are doing all of these things together, and we want to nurture that soil and continue to allow that to grow. And we have to do the work on the inside of saying, this feels different. This feels different, and I'm uncomfortable, but am I just uncomfortable, or is the sky really falling? Because I assure you, as we continue to yield good fruit, I almost guarantee it that the feeling will continue to change and to grow and to develop. And so we have to be ready spiritually to say yes when God calls us. We have to be ready to say yes. We have to be ready to answer that call. And we have to work on ourselves to make sure that we are aware that, that was just an acorn. That didn't feel so good, but it was just an acorn. And I think everything will be okay. Because everything will be okay. Everything is okay. Things are going in a wonderful direction, and we are, as a parish, yielding good fruit. So let's continue to celebrate that good fruit that we are yielding, and let's celebrate Cassie. And I invite you to all stand with me, and Cassie and your sponsors, you may come forward, and if there are any little ones who would like a front row seat, you may have one, although if you want to stay there, that's fine too. But we will now continue with the baptism. You want to come? All right.